Okay, everybody, we're going to have Steve Reddick give the presentation on the Petersen family, which actually I believe goes back to the 1850s. Okay, Steve, it's all yours.
Okay. Thanks, Mother, for volunteering me to give this presentation. And so, anyway, we'll go back to the original fellow here, Heinrich Petersen. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
No. Use the microphone.
You have to pack it around.
Yeah. Yep, take it out.
Take it out, untwist it, turn it on.
Yeah. It's all turned on.
Okay.
Great.
Anyway, Heinrich Petersen, and there's a depiction of him here that was drawn by his daughter. She's a heck of an artist. Anyway, he was born, I'm thinking, 1835, and was born on an island that's they call it Furin Island or something like that, or Fire Island. And if you read these old newspaper articles about him, there's 3 or 4 different names to that island. So who knows what the real name of that place is? But it was Denmark at the time he was born. Apparently, it's one of those islands that are at the north end of Germany, south end of Denmark, that switch back and forth. So he was poor, an orphan apparently. Went down to Hamburg, had relatives there that had ships and what have you, and when the gold was discovered, so he was like 16 years old, he went aboard a ship as a able-bodied seaman and sailed the 7 seas for a few years until he finally got into San Francisco, and I guess he collected his wages and headed for the gold fields. He went up to the gold fields just briefly, figured out that he wasn't going to find very much gold, and came down to Dixon and started working for somebody. And then he bought his first piece of property here in Dixon. It says in 1859. And then he started buying and selling property and farming. He'd buy a piece of property and farm it, and then buy another piece of property and put somebody else help farming it, and bought and sold land for a long time. He sold. He made a trade with maize that in this that area of Dixon over there. One of the first big developers in Dixon developed that piece. He went to just south of town, where the Sork place is, I guess you'd call it nowadays. That was his home ranch, his first ranch, and then he started picking up more and more pieces of property as he got older. He married a gal that came across from Germany, from I don't know how you say that, the Holstein or Schweich something. He knows how to say it. Swishlick, Holstein area. This gal came over. Henry Tim was here. He was married to a Buick, I guess is the right name. When I was a kid, it was Buick. Boyk. That's Boyk. That lived at our ranch. That was the nephew. So Henry Tim's wife told his sister to come on out, and she had somebody for him to marry. So she came out, and they got married. They had 5 children. They had J.H. Petersen, that's depicted here, and they had William David Petersen, who everybody called Billy Pete, or back when he was young. Then they had Christopher Petersen, and Amelia Petersen and Matilda Petersen, that's everybody called Telly, that painted that picture, or didn't paint it, it's drew that picture. See, J.H. Petersen had 4 kids. Harry, well, I guess Claire was older, so Claire Petersen, Harry Petersen, Frances Petersen, and Dorothy Petersen. And that's the line that I'm in. And she's you know, my mom is Harry Petersen's daughter, so she would be the 4th generation in Dixon. I'd be the 5th. My son would be the 6th. His 2 boys are here. 7th. And one more, and he didn't get here. He was supposed to show up, or she was supposed to show up. But anyway, so we could have had the whole, you know, the whole what, 5 generations here. We got 4 in this room. Anyway, the Heinrich Petersen, they called him Henry. Called him Heinrich when he got here, then they called him Henry for a long time. Most of his business dealings, he was Henry Petersen. And he accumulated a lot of property, but he also was, you know, a pillar of the community. He worked in the Bank of Dixon. He was one of the founders of the Bank of Dixon. That's where his office was. There's a picture of him up here that they found in the cornerstone of the bank that was built in 1910 when they tore it down for the parking lot for the Bank of America. Let's see. So during that time, he kept accumulating more property. Then his kids, J.H. Petersen, there's a couple funny stories, but one of them has to do with a curry too. Everybody calls him Uncle Bill or Billy Pete. Bill Petersen was a real character, but I guess in like the 1890s or late 1880s, his best friend was a curry. And they were going to go back, like, to Missouri or somewhere, and have a freight company. And so their dad, Henry, or they called him then, or Heinrich Petersen, he didn't like the idea, and the judge didn't like that idea either. So they put him to work doing other stuff, you know. So they let the boys start running the ranches and get active in those businesses, because they were young men, 20, you know, and so they stayed here. He kept working in the bank, and then when he retired, they you know, they kind of took over. J.H. Petersen ended up being the president of the bank, and he continued picking up more property, filling in all the little gaps in the properties that they had. And J.H. Petersen was very involved in the electric railroad. He was involved. They've got this, what you're talking about, the Grangers, Dixon Business Owners Association. They were very involved in that. In fact, I think they were all directors and what have you. Roland Moss, I think, was the secretary or something in there. He was a secretary. He worked for Schultze, I think, first. Roland Moss was married Amelia Petersen, and there's a picture of their family up here on the table too. then let's see. I guess I should go down one line at the same time instead of back and forth. I'll switch back over to J.H. Petersen. Anyway, his children. Claire was Tommy's grandmother. TJ's great grandmother was the sister, and she was she married Tom Raycraft, and then later on Kilkenny, that was the postmaster. They ended up running the ranch that J.H. got in. When Heinrich passed away, he gave each of his kids, each of the boys a ranch, and then he gave another ranch to the two girls to share. Kilkenny's were on that ranch till it was sold. That was the one that's down there called Raycraft Ranch. That's the, I don't know how many of them are around now. Just 1, 2. Dixon. Surprised Dick's not here. So, and then Harry, that was my grandfather, her father. He married Sadie Pearson, that was from, well, she went to high school in Woodland, and then they were introduced because Harry and her brother were fraternity brothers. Yeah, Davis. Then he had 3 daughters. That's one. 2 of them had children. The other one didn't. So Harriet married Charles Davis. They had 6 kids. My mom married Harold Reddick and had 5 kids. So we're really the most prolific branch of the Petersen family in Dixon, and that's funny. And Patricia didn't have any children. The Reddicks are still mostly right around this area. I think the Davises are Napa and Oregon. Patricia moved to Texas. Let's see. Then, which one's next? Call him Uncle Bill. William David Petersen was just a great character. I knew him when I was little. He was a really good shot. The guy could really shoot, and they said when he was young he was wild. He'd leave the bar, and ride his horse out of town and shoot the street lights out and get in trouble for it. When I was about 10 years old maybe, I was out at the duck club out at the ranch, and he came out and he was sitting by his pickup, and he said, "Steve, you want to fetch a goose for me?" And I said, "Sure." And he got his rifle out behind the seat, and the geese were flying over really high in the formation. I mean, 200, 300 yards up there, I think. And he, bang, he shoots the goose, and it goes down. One shot, goose landed way out in the field. And I went out there and got it, and shot right through the head. And I got it back, and he looked at it, and he rubs his front sight, and he says, "Oh, I was aiming at the white spot." And he still hit it in the head. So Bill Schroeder told me I should go on the Dixon Library site, look at the Tribune archives, and I did that the other day, and I went back to the late 1890s, and I saw something that said W.D. Petersen, and so I clicked on the thing, and it was something where he had protested at a trap shoot because they had awarded the first prize to somebody, but he had exactly the same score, and he protested that they were supposed to have a shoot off. And of course the judges said, "Oh yeah, you're right. You're supposed to have a shoot off." But that article doesn't say who won it. I think the shoot off was later on. So no, that guy was a real character. And I saw him shoot a deer about the same way up at the Petersen Range up out of Vacville, Pleasant Valley. My dad took him up. We picked him up over there at the Young's place there on Pedrick Road, where he was living at that time in the pool house, and drove up there, went around the north end, got up to the top of a ridge, and looked across the canyon. It's about 250 yards across, and there was a big buck laying under the tree. And he said, "Oh, I'll shoot that right between the eyes." And he shot it, shot the deer, and we had to drive way around to get there. Went over there and looked at that deer, and it had a groove right up its nose. And the bullet went in right between its eyes. And he was, 80, that was in like 1961 or 2 or something, and I think he only lasted a couple more years. So that was it. He had 2 children, yeah, and Betty and Marjorie, and they Betty had 2 children, Barbara and Beverly, that were here in high school, and then they moved, and Marjorie went down to Monterey area and had 1 child, married a guy named Dave Taylor, and then pretty soon Betty and Bob Young moved down to the same area, and that's where their families are now, basically, except Barbara passed away and her kids are still down there. Beverly has houses here and there that she stays at. That's what there's. So there's 3 of Barbara's kids. Beverly's got no kids, so that generation, that line is run out on the running out too. Unless those kids start having kids. And then there was Christopher Petersen. He went. I guess he was like the smart one, so he went to the University of the Pacific and got an accounting degree, and was on the debate club and all that stuff. That he was a really good public speaker, they said, and he got sick and passed away at the age of 21. So he had no kids. Then there was Matilda. She married the Doc Hall, who was the I don't know how they described him, the beloved town doctor. He was Dixon's doctor for years and years and years, and that's where we get Hall Park and that stuff. They all live down here at May Street, then Marie married Roland Moss, and so Matilda and Amelia married Roland Moss. Anyway, Matilda and Amelia lived across the street from each other. Mays and I don't know what that is, about 3rd Street. And then kitty corner from that, Heinrich Petersen's widow, Marie Frederica, or later Mary Frances, lived. And I forgot to mention Matilda. Matilda had, I guess, had one daughter and adopted a daughter. And so that was Marie Smizer, wasn't it? Marie Smizer? And Kay Sisson. So Kay married Homer Sisson, who went to work at the Bank of Dixon. And Marie married Vernon Smizer, who was a rancher and I guess had heavy equipment. That's what I remember. And then so we've got his, or their son Alan here, and grandson Lester. Let's see, Lester. There was a Lester that's a couple.
Passed away. He was 1 year old.
Oh.
Matilda's son.
Oh, okay. That's right. And so that's Lester. I don't know. Lester didn't have grandkids yet, I guess. But and you just has 2 daughters, right?
And a grandson.
Oh, you do have one. Oh, okay. Okay, you never told me that. So, so anyway, so anyway, that's I don't know what else. Should I say anything else? What have I missed?
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Steve about the Petersen families? I do. Okay. The Harry Peterson's ranch out there on Robinson Road, how big of a ranch was that at one time when Peter Tim was out there farming with them? Was that a couple sections or what?
Yeah, I think I didn't go into that part of it, did I? When J.H. Petersen kind of ran the bank, and when Heinrich passed away, I think it was 2,400 acres out there, and I think he bought Peter Tim out around in the 1890s or somewhere, or early 1900s.
Yeah, Peter Tim was in the 1900 census living out there, and it was in the Rio Vista Township is where it's listed as.
Yeah, then J.H. Petersen kept buying property out there for what they called it the Petersen Company, which was the estate of Heinrich Petersen. So like I said, each boy got a ranch. The 2 girls shared a little bit bigger ranch. And then there were 2 more bigger ranches that were jointly owned, and they made the Petersen Company. And he went in, and I was showing my mom, here's a thing from the county where he paid off somebody's delinquent taxes and got part of that property. So he filled in any gaps that were in the properties, and and kept expanding all that until the Depression hit. And then when the Depression hit, they ran the Bank of Dixon. So the Depression hit, and they ended up having to sell the Giannini because the Bank of America was strong enough to stay afloat, I guess.
Correct. Yeah.
And but it ended up I've seen things that said it was 3,000 acres, but they're saying that now it's shrunk a little bit because a erosion and all stuff like that. So it's 2,800 and something acres to that ranch.
I saw in the old Tribunes that Peter Tim, after the 1900 census, about 1902 or 3, they had a big storm out there, and it drove him and his family into town, and it said that everybody welcomed Peter Tim back into town. So, and I believe he was living out there at the Doyle Lane Ranch then. Yeah. But anyway, the storms drove Peter in, but I guess your grandpa, he stuck it out.
Well, he didn't live there. He
Didn't live, okay.
He lived at the Raycraft Ranch.
Okay. But Peter did live out there and got flooded out. Okay, thank you.
Right, and there's the Tim house is there. I sent you a picture of it. It's dilapidated. So when my mom was little and rode her horse, they'd go. There was a man named Lawrence that lived there that worked for them, and he was a horse and buggy guy too. They hadn't got into the driving cars yet, or he hadn't. He was, I don't know how, he must have been very old. And because where that house is would be, if you take Canwright Road to the north, it makes a turn onto Flannery, but if you just go straight, you can see the house down there about a half a mile. And it's right in the corner, one of the corners of the ranch there. And there was an easement through that the road used to go through. So Canwright would continue down right into the ranch there. Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
Is
Yes.
this a Petersen house here on West A?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that house, the 506 West A Street, when she was in 8th grade or 7th or 8th grade, when they moved to town so that they could go to high school, and my grandfather bought that from Peters. Peters had it before, and they bought that house, and so she lived there for her high school years, and then we moved back into it. When my grandfather moved out to the ranch in late 60s, and we moved into that house there until I was out of high school, and then they sold the house.
Okay, yes, Linda?
What did you have on these ranches? Were they sheep? Were you farming it, or?
Yeah, both. Both, but sheep, farming. Originally it was wheat and barley.
Okay.
And then later on they got, maybe in the 1860s, 70s, they got into sheep real heavy. And Mike, J.H. Petersen was the president of the California Wool Growers Association. And then my grandfather, Harry Petersen, he went all over the United States representing the Wool Growers Association here in California for a year. He said that took up all his time. Harry was the director of the fair. Now Tommy is. So, for 25 years he was the director. So, at least that's what the little plaque on his desk said.
Anybody else have any questions? No? Well, I guess we'll adjourn until the meeting. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your presentation. And for all of you, our next meeting, we'll have refreshments.
When they had the wagon train put together, he was born in Maryville, Missouri on the way out. Then the rest of the grandparents, I had two great-grandparents that were born up in Colusa County, and the rest were born in Dixon. So I come from several. Yeah, and that's why, like Dawn Holly, whatever her last name is now, We were laughing about it, that we couldn't date anybody in Dixon. So,
Okay, thank you again, Steve, and meeting adjourned, and refreshments are served. Thank you.